What's up, everybody? Welcome back to your favorite New York Jets subscription podcast, Badlands. I'm your host, Joe Caporoso, joined as always by Connor Rogers. This is probably the week, as it seems the New York Jets are getting imminently close to hiring a general manager and a head coach, with the runaway favorites right now looking like Aaron Glenn and Lance Newmark, who we're going to spend most of this podcast talking about, since we haven't talked about him all that much the past couple weeks or so. Connor, how you doing? How you feeling?
All right, it's gonna be a real interesting, what do we want to call it, 48 hours here, for what was a really long search. I think that as you and I sit here and record, the news out there right now is that Aaron Glenn will be in for his second interview, which shouldn't really surprise anybody. But Lance Newmark is the only other person, obviously on the GM side of things, with a confirmed second interview. We're going to be really interesting to see if we get a second round where there's multiple people coming in.
Yep.
You got to keep in mind, I know Glenn was virtual, or if this is going to be hey, after the first round, we zeroed in on a duo we like, and we're going to see if we can get a contract done with them while they're here. That's going to, and I'm not, a lot of people are jumping to conclusions right now and assuming that's the case. I don't know that. Sometimes with how under wraps this search has been, there's a chance that there is going to be a real second round, and we just don't know yet. There could also be a second round on one side and not the other. They could want to close things with Aaron Glenn and then finish, with the GM search. They can end up liking a GM a lot, but end up keep talking to different. Mind you, there's going to be a lot of competition for Glenn, not for Newmark, but specifically for Glenn. So, yeah, this thing is it's not rapidly moving. It has never rapidly moved, but it finally has taken some kind of steps forward.
Yeah, you could sort of, just the timing of everything, finally getting to the second round. Now the Lions are out of the playoffs. I don't know. It just felt like the swirl is happening. Ben
Yeah.
Johnson goes to the Bears. So Newmark, we mentioned him a little bit here or there. They interviewed so many people, like some of these names just kind of like drift and filter through. Long time NFL executive with the Lions for over 20 years, recently moved to Washington, where he is effectively the number two in command to a Commanders team that's been very successful this year. A name that's been out there here or there as like someone to watch as a potential future GM. Has some history doing work around, I would say, information technology and analytics, like broadly throughout his resume, but really worked his way up from being a scout. Like, it's a very like traditional road to being a general manager, area scout personnel, in Detroit for a lot of bad years, and then in Detroit for part of the turnaround here in the past few years. So if you're a Jet fan and you're like looking at this, I guess the question is, and you pointed this out in the Discord, why him? Why is he the guy? What about his resume? What about his background bubbles him up compared to the other people that you're looking at? What are your preliminary thoughts on, as of this moment, we're recording this Monday night, him being the likely favorite to be the general manager? Not a done deal, but as it sits now, the likely favorite.
So Newmark, and I'm going to be really fair here. I'm going to break down both sides, of it all. I think how we got here is he has been consistently attached to the Detroit coordinators. It was a thought that if Ben Johnson took a job where there's not a GM, that Newmark could be the GM coming with him. Obviously, he is now in the second round with Aaron Glenn. So maybe this is, I like to call it comfort food, which I'm personally not a huge fan of in this era anymore with the Jets. I think that, hey, we've kind of seen a little bit of it when Gase got here. He ended up, getting in the ear of the owners and getting that whole front office wiped out with McCagnon and his crew. And then he got Joe Douglas in here, and we saw how that ultimately went. It's, sometimes you want, I think if you're the Jets right now, this search, I would be trying to, because I see a lot in the Discord, like, hey, a lot of this is a crapshoot. And guess what? A lot of it is, right? But with crapshoots, because people love to call the NFL draft a crapshoot, and sometimes I get really bothered by that. I think big picture, it is in the most layman's simple terms, but I think when you identify it that way, what you have to put is you are playing odds, like gambling, lotto, whatever it may be. But like all odds, you are always searching for the best odds. So what you're doing is you're trying to nail down variables that increase your odds. And I think when it comes down to, the Jets situation, one of the variables is you've tried pairings before in one sense or the other. Let's not forget Joe Douglas was a huge part of the hiring Robert Saleh aspect as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. They tried it. It didn't work. I think one variable, if you're the Jets, you want to eliminate is and they're willing to do it with Vrabel, which I understood because that's a different tier of candidate. But you just need to get the best guy at each spot right now and expect them to be grown adults and work together and maybe challenge each other because there's not that comfort food relationship there. Now, I like Aaron Glenn a lot. I really, really do. I don't think Aaron Glenn is the type of candidate that you're treating like Mike Vrabel and saying, hey, you get the floor of you want Newmark here, he's the GM. And I felt that way with Brian Flores and the potential of Ryan Grigson. I never believed Flores was Grigson or bust somewhere, but I felt that if that was something that came along with it, and it was something that bothered me when people started to shoot down Hallaby, because everyone's like, well, you already went the Philly route for GM, totally different tree, totally different style, and just because Hallaby doesn't have a coach attached to him right now, I don't think that should eliminate him from being a candidate. And I felt that way with Bergonzi before he got hired. I think you just had to hire, Matt Nagy or Spags to get Borgonzi. I thought, go get the best guy at each spot. So Newmark specifically, right? This is somebody who, you said it, he's worked in the NFL a long time, 28 years, 26 with the Lions. And I think when people have candidates come up with this, and a lot of this is, content accounts and all that stuff, they want to pull out the reasons for hope. And I get it. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you like this has no chance of working. I'm just going to be totally honest with how I feel about it as somebody that's never met Lance Newmark, right? Now, do I know people that have been around him and things like that? Sure. But just what we know. This is someone that, he was with the Lions for 26 seasons, which means for the last 3 years he was with the Lions. That was when Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and Ray Agnew and all that's coaching staff, and they had a couple changes, I believe, on the president business side as well. That's when it all turned. But you also, when you say that, you need to remind yourself that he was there for 23 years before that, when the Lions for 2 decades were a dumpster fire. And ironically,
just a minor footnote.
Yeah, like I just want to like be fair. If you want to say he's been a part of the turnaround for the Lions, and then he was assistant GM for a year with the Commanders, which sure he was, but be honest with yourself. When people talk about the Commanders, did maybe he make some moves that have helped that roster this year? Sure, I'm sure he has. I'm going to be fair here. But the Commanders are where they are right now because they got a competent owner who hired a competent GM and head coach, and they drafted the best rookie quarterback performance we've seen in how long, right? Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels and Cliff Kingsbury have that train moving right now, okay? So I don't want to hear like he's the engine to the Lions and Commanders rebuilds. Maybe he wasn't. He obviously is some kind of piece to it. We're being fair here. I like that he's had a lot of roles. He has a lot of experience. I think he's a guy that people like. I want to make that very clear. Like, I do think he's a guy people like working with, all of those things. So those are all the good things, right? And clearly, if he's in this second round with Aaron Glenn, it feels like Aaron Glenn probably respects and likes him. That's a good sign. Where I have my concerns, where I want to call this for what it is at times, the Lions, for a long time, were very Jetsian in where they had this 2-decade run, maybe longer, where the GMs just kept getting fired, but all the other people in the building just kept kind of surviving.
Yep.
And he was one of them. Like, the Lions stunk for a very long time, and he's one of the people, and he's not alone. There was a lot of these people that just kept kind of falling into promotions and more power, but the person at the top was constantly getting their head cut off. And what I've heard is that when they had changes on the business side, that also was a part of the Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes regime hiring, those guys came in and pushed all of that 2-decade plus rot out of the building bit by bit. Now, Newmark obviously is somebody that assimilated well in with there, and eventually he did leave to go to the Commanders for a promotion, so let's be fair with that. But he didn't come in with that regime. He was already one of those people that were there. The other thing that I have my eye on, and you could just do your Google if you need confirmation of this, Charles Robinson, who does an amazing job covering the league and hires. When Adam Gase got Mike McCagnon fired, and they were working with Adam Gase of who they wanted to be the GM, Charles Robinson had a report that On the list with Joe Douglas, and there's like 2 or 3 other people, was Lance Newmark. I have talked to plenty of people around the league that know him and Adam Gase way back in the day, because Adam Gase was an assistant coach on the Detroit staff. They are very, very close. So this guy kind of had the answers to the test going into the interview, because once upon a time, Adam Gase completely fooled this same Jets brass, right? Yep. And I'm not saying Newmark's a fraud. I want to be fair here. Like, there is a world where he succeeds. He gets this job, he makes the right picks, and he has success. But it's all about increasing your odds. So I have to sit here and preach hope and why it'll be different when this is somebody that has significant ties to arguably the worst hire in franchise or in history, right? Number one. Number two, this is exactly what you just did the last 2 times. This is Mike Maccagnan and Joe Douglas's route through the NFL. Long-time scout, kind of caught fire at the right time later in their careers. Joe Douglas was a little younger. I want to be fair on that front, and had more hype, and deservingly so. It didn't work, but Joe Douglas had a lot of hype once upon a time. This is the same hire. This is the same exact hire. It's
same playbook.
It's the same exact playbook. So yeah, it might be different this time, but it might not be, because it hasn't been different the last 2 times. It has not been different. So I struggle with this one. Like, there is the Gase ties, that the 23 years in Detroit, that was so much different from the last 3. And it's not like he stood on the desk and said, it's time to change Detroit. They got the right people in there that changed everything. So I'm not saying he's a bad scout. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. There's a chance that he's probably pretty decent in both those areas. But this job is different. And I don't know why the Jets needed to hire a search firm and do this search for 2 months if they are just going to go down the same exact road that they went down the last 2 times. That to me is the word uninspiring. It might work. I want to be fair. He might make the right picks. Aaron Glenn might be an awesome coach, and I'm really excited if Aaron Glenn is the guy. But if you are being honest with yourself, you cannot look in the mirror and say, man, they're trying something really different here this time.
No, it's the same playbook, as you said. The resumes, there's a lot that reminds me of the sort of, particularly Maccagnan process.
I agree.
Little
it's
bit
closer
of Douglas,
to that than
but
Douglas.
We've never met this guy. We've just started to see more bits and pieces of his press conferences and how he talks. But from like a demeanor perspective, the first thing I was thinking watching him, I was like, there's a lot of like Maccagnan energy here. That does not mean they're going to be the same executives, have the same strategy. I was like, they just kind of have like that same kind of energy. And sometimes that like more like sort of cerebral, like subdued energy could work out. But that's just what clicks in my head, because I'm always looking for Jets comparisons. And I just wonder, for a guy who, to his credit, was able to survive for almost 3 decades in Detroit while a lot of losing was going on, where the Jets have this history of guys hanging around and hanging around and hanging around. Is he the kind of guy who's going to help engineer structural change to how the Jets operate? What we've been saying nonstop, separating church and state, football and business, new type of analytics, clean out the scouting department. Or is he going to come in and say, you know what, we're going to hang on to this guy, and we're going to hang on to Phil Savage, and we're going to hang on board to this guy from the Maccagnan era and this guy from the Douglas era, and like we'll make 1 or 2 new hires, and like
just that saves money, and that the owner likes hearing that.
Yeah, kind of be agreeable, and like you said, he drafts the right quarterback or nails quarterback, he could look like a genius. Look at like everyone in Washington does right now. And I'm not saying Washington has done other smart things, but if Greg Zuerlein misses that kick last year, does any of this other stuff matter? Because in Washington doesn't have Daniels, so of course we're involved in that as well. So look,
always connected.
It's always connected. So I don't want to write the hire off. It's also not a guarantee he's going to be the hire. Now he's like, they've crossed over very briefly, him and Glenn, but I think like you said, we don't need to do the forced duo thing. Just hire who you think will be the best GM, hire who you think will be the head coach. And Aaron Glenn very well is the best candidate that all of us thought they could very well get for a while. This is not like a surprising, shocking hire. Again, you hired a search firm to get the most likely head coaching candidate that if you would have asked you and I in week 16, who is most likely to be the Jets' next head coach, we would have said Aaron Glenn, and that very well could be where this ends. Newmark, he seemed kind of like a second or third tier candidate. And now because of some crossover with Glenn, he may end up getting the job. And I think, as people have also fairly pointed out, Joe Douglas had the top resume, had the top contract. universally praised by Jet fans, by the media, by everyone. Home run hire did not work. McCagnon was a little more similar to Newmark in that it was like you could tell he has a good reputation around the league. People would go to bat for him. Seems like a good, like amenable dude who has
Yes.
like grinded it out and has like put together like a really respectful career. Is he ready for the top chair in New York? We're not going to know until he's in it. It's not, but it's not one that you're like, okay, wow, the Jets and 33rd team like really shook the snow globe this time. We're trying something different. And even if it flames out, we tried something different. This is like, look, like, let's just put it back in the oven, heat it back up, and maybe this time it's going to come out and taste a little better and like things will break our way this time. Maybe they will. But that's my initial POV, I think, from what the people you talk to and the people that are generally in all the circles that we're having conversations in, I think that's the fairest shake to give it. Now, we're going to know really quick, right? We're recording this Monday night. It seems like both of them are going to be in the building in person at some point together tomorrow, or both will be there, between Tuesday and Wednesday. Glenn is probably going to go through the process of interviewing with the Saints. You feel like he'll give them that respect, right?
I think so.
So it's not out of the realm of possibility that the Jets don't get Glenn at that point, because he could still end up going to the Saints. It's probably going to come down to money and general manager plan, and like it could be a couple other like little things at the last second. Then it gets really interesting. Infrastructure, like what are the Jets? Yeah, because he has a job, right? He's going to get the Saints or the Jets job. Yeah, it's 100% probability that in my mind that's going to happen. He's just going to make the choice, and it's going to come down to who makes the better offer at this point. And then if you're the Jets and you don't get Glenn, where does it pivot there? Do you pivot to taking the swing with McCown, or do you pivot to Arthur Smith or Brian Flores or something else? I don't know. I mean, but we're going to know very quick here now. I do hope, and I don't know if they're going to do this because this just might be like bang, bang, we're recording emergency pod in 48 hours, like official. I do hope they do a couple other second round interviews for general manager candidates. I think it's worth the time. You've went this far, take the extra day and a half and have the conversations. It just feels like the wind is starting to blow in one direction. But what do you think plays out over the next 48 hours? And